JD Vance himself, I think a few months ago, did a tweet saying he could not think of a better use of US military power than for strikes like the ones we have seen on Venezuelan boats.
The Times this morning reports that Britain's spy agencies and military have stopped sharing intelligence with the US about suspected drug trafficking vessels in the Caribbean. The Trump administration has been accused of violating international law by carrying out lethal raids against suspected smugglers. Britain is said to fear being complicit. A source in the British military told The Times, "We don't just target the vessel and kill people, we would arrest them." The Times Washington editor Katy has the story and told us about the thinking behind Donald Trump's actions.
If you speak to figures in the administration, they will talk about the war on terror, and they talk about the war on drug cartels, and they will talk about home security. And therefore, you have a situation where figures in the administration and the Make America Great Again movement, who have, we know, been very weary of the idea of kind of forever wars far away from home, Ukraine war, for example, they will say, actually, a really good use of the military is bordering around America, and that means Mexico and Venezuela, and they link Venezuela to fentanyl, and that's why they're going there. And JD Vance himself, I think a few months ago, did a tweet saying he could not think of a better use of US military power than for strikes like the ones we have seen on Venezuelan boats.
American presidents for the last 20 years have been rather keen on extrajudicial killings. But if you pause to think about a drug dealer, normally what you do if you find a drug dealer in the civilized world is you arrest them, you mount a case against them, and you have an impartial trial to determine their guilt before you punish them. This system is, you're a bad person committing a crime for which there's no judicial process, and we're going to kill you.
Yes, it's going to strike you because we think you are cartel, and we think that is a threat to US national security. And that's the argument they go. But clearly, for the reasons you just outlined, it makes a lot of figures, I think on both sides actually of the political spectrum, uncomfortable. And we've seen that in Congress recently in terms of efforts by Democrats, but also some Republicans chiming in to say, what is the legal basis? And then you get to the next stage of this, which is the idea of regime change. And there are enough figures around Donald Trump who can get behind going after the cartels, if you want to frame it like that. Though, of course, you can debate how much a few vessels has of the impact of fentanyl in America. But the next stage, if they start to move to land strikes, we're hearing, some talk of invasion. Maduro's talking about how Venezuela would respond. If you get into regime change, is Donald Trump really looking for kind of all the weight and all the complications that come with that, as someone who has prided himself on an America First strategy?
Yeah, an invasion just sounds insane, doesn't it, when you put it in those bold terms, that America will invade Venezuela?
Yeah, and that's why it is still a bit smoke and mirrors on how far they're going to go. We know that Donald Trump in his foreign policy, he has said this, he likes to keep the other side guessing. Yeah. He doesn't understand why previous presidents have said, if you do X, we're going to move this number of troops to Syria, and then they do exactly that. So there's obviously always a little bit of deal making and positioning going on here. In the first term, they would often talk about regime change in Venezuela, but they never got there. This time around, Trump hasn't always been as specific. I think if the administration could find a way to pressure Maduro into stepping down and almost having a peaceful transition of power, that would obviously be their preference, but that is clearly very hard to get right.
And this does create a problem for the relationship between the US and Britain, which is what's on the front of the Times this morning, which is that our spy agencies and military are not going to share intelligence with the US, because by doing that, they'll be effectively saying, here are people you can now kill.
Yeah, and a concern, if you look at the report originally by CNN, as you say, picked up in the Times and moved forward, a question as to whether the UK would then be on the wrong side of the law if it looked as though it was providing the information for this. And of course, you can just expect that the US is not going to take particularly well to the UK not playing ball when it comes to the special relationship we hear so much about. And we have a press briefing later today with Caroline Leavitt in the White House where you would expect this to come up potentially. But it does show, I think, Donald Trump, for now, pre-midterms, is in control of the Senate, Congress. He has managed to, there was an attempt by the Senate last week to try and basically put a brake to stop him from being able to, launch certain strikes on Venezuela and go further. And his critics did not win, Donald Trump won. So he has a lot of power in America. But of course, other countries don't have to play ball. And there is a question as to how long Donald Trump is going to have that control if we think about going to the midterms next year when the dynamics could really change.
All of which would suggest now would be a good time to have an ambassador to Washington, since Mandelson was defenestrated. Are we close to having one? I mean, there's the BBC issue. Some people are saying someone needs to get on bended knee and say, please don't rinse the BBC for $1 billion, $1 billion, because we'll all have to pay for it. Are you hearing news of movement there?
Certainly in the ambassador race, there's movement. And I did say to someone in the diplomatic service, with the BBC row, is that something we really the ambassador? They were a little bit less sure how that much fall in. But you do, of course, need to have dialogue with the US side. And for now, with the departure of Peter Mandelson, you've had James Roscoe, who's number 2 in place. The administration get on well with James Roscoe. But the sense that there's going to be change, that always expecting something means that you can't really have this permanent setting of a relationship. The general sense at the moment is there's a short list slowly going towards interviews. Varun Chandra, the number 10 business advisor, Christian Turner, a lifelong diplomat, are seen as the 2 favourites in that field. Varun Chandra, for the piece that we have in the Times today, we spoke to Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, and he's very positive about Varun Chandra. So it's someone the administration could get behind. Some of the Foreign Office want more Foreign Office experience, some of the veterans. But I would note on that shortlist, a lot of figures in Whitehall are saying it does seem generally a bit low powered, and is number 10 going to actually look at it and say, do we need to stretch the net a bit wider?
It's so interesting. That's Katy Bowles there, the Times Washington editor. So interesting hearing her talk about the thinking behind the new ambassador, because it's such a crucial role, and you could see how that person could have been a really important person to have in post. Now we're hearing Donald Trump saying he's got an obligation to sue the BBC. Yesterday on the programme we had Nigel Huddleston for the Tories saying the BBC should grovel, but also that the Labour government should have a quiet word in Trump's ear, basically to say, look, this is an essential part of the institution in this country.
And it's whether you want a figure who can deal with Trump by looking him in the eyes, or you want a Foreign Office person who knows how the embassy works. And that seems to be the thing that they're wrestling with at the moment.
So the message all of us should send to the President of the United States is quit engaging in illegal actions in the Caribbean and international waters, blowing up boats and people in an extrajudicial fashion. And when it comes to Venezuela, stop making these threats and amassing military assets off the shore and claiming you somehow have the authority to do that. The Constitution invests the authority to go to war with the United States Congress. That's what this resolution is all about.
So today, the Senate must act to uphold the Constitution, uphold our national security, and reaffirm the authority of Congress to have its proper say on matters of war and peace. I yield the floor.
And thanking the President for what he's done on behalf of the many parents who will not have to bury their children early and who will never know that they were saved from this. But there is no doubt, none whatsoever, that every time we take a strike and we send tons of these poisonous drugs to the bottom of the ocean, thousands of American lives have been saved. So, Mr. President, thank you for what you're doing. On behalf of all those Americans who will be saved from these poisonous drugs, thank you, and continue to do what you're doing. I object to the resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
So, to my colleagues, please do not be confused about this. Never in the history of our country has a Congress terminated a military action because they did not give permission to the Commander-in-Chief. Never in the history of the country has the Supreme Court ruled that the Congress has the power to terminate hostilities simply because they disagree with the president. Because today that becomes the norm, then you've taken the power of the commander-in-chief away from the president, you conferred it upon us.
Ms. Slotkin, aye. Mr. Grassley, no. Mr. Schiff, aye. Ms. Hirono, aye. Mr. Graham, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 49, the nays are 51, and the motion is not agreed to.